I didn't know my marriage would end without a single argument that night. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic confrontation, just one quiet decision, made after months of pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. My husband looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Stop acting insecure. It's just a quick late-night meeting." I smiled faintly and replied, "Sure, you've always been loyal to your meetings." He didn't hear the weight behind my words. He never did. He was already halfway gone, mentally rehearsing where he was headed, who he was about to see, and how he'd explain it later if I asked questions. I didn't ask. I didn't argue. I didn't wait for him that night. I simply removed one thing he never imagined I would. The next morning, when he walked into the room and saw what I had left on his chair, he froze so hard you could feel the silence crack. My name is Owen's wife in every legal document, but in this story, I am simply a woman who spent 6 years married to a man who believed I was too trusting, too busy, too naive to notice patterns. I'm 33 years old. I work in data analysis. I build models based on behavior, repetition, and truth revealed over time. And for months, my husband's behavior had been telling a story he thought I wasn't smart enough to read. He worked in corporate communications, polished, articulate, convincing. The kind of man who could explain anything away if you let him. And for a long time, I did. I told myself I was being supportive, understanding, secure. I told myself that love meant not questioning everything. But love does not mean blindness, and trust does not mean ignoring evidence. That night, I didn't take revenge. I didn't expose him. I didn't beg for honesty. I did something far quieter and far more final. I took off my wedding ring, the ring I had worn every single day for 6 years, the symbol of promises he had already broken. I left it where he would find it without explanation, and I walked away. This isn't a story about rage or humiliation. It's about the moment a woman stops pretending, stops negotiating with her own instincts, and finally acts. Because sometimes the loudest truth isn't spoken at all. I was 27 when I married him, young enough to believe that love and effort could solve almost anything, old enough to think I knew myself. We met through work connections, one of those introductions that feels accidental until it changes the entire trajectory of your life. He was confident without being loud, intelligent in a way that felt reassuring, not competitive. We talked easily that first night about careers, long hours, shared ambition. There was chemistry, yes, but more than that, there was alignment. Or so I thought. I worked in data analysis. I liked structure, clarity, logic. I believed in patterns, but I also believed people could choose differently if they wanted to. He worked in corporate communications, a world of narratives and image management. He knew how to speak, how to smooth tension, how to make complicated things sound reasonable. At the time, I admired that difference. We balanced each other, or at least I believed we did. Our early years together were good. Not perfect, but solid. We built routines, hosted friends, talked about future promotions, possible kids someday, where we might move if opportunities lined up right. He made me laugh. I grounded him. That was the story we told ourselves. That was the story everyone else saw. We bought a house together after 3 years of marriage. Shared accounts, shared plans, shared assumptions about loyalty. I trusted him because I had no reason not to, and because trusting him made my life simpler. The late-night meetings didn't start suddenly. They crept in about 8 months before everything collapsed. At first, they made sense. His job was demanding. Crisis management meant unpredictable hours. Clients panicked. Executives demanded attention. I understood that world well enough to accept inconvenience as part of ambition. He'd get calls around 9 or 10 at night, always apologetic, always rushed. Emergency with the Thompson account. Executive team needs alignment. He'd grab his laptop, sometimes change into business casual clothes, even though he claimed it was a video call, and disappear into his home office for hours. I'd bring him tea, ask if he needed anything. He'd thank me absently, already elsewhere. I told myself this was marriage, supporting each other through busy seasons, not making everything about me. But small details began to bother me. He'd come back from those meetings looking different. Hair disturbed, like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. Makeup slightly smudged. The smell of outside air clinging to him. Sometimes cologne that definitely wasn't mine. And emotionally, he felt distant, distracted, like his body was home, but his mind hadn't returned yet. I noticed because that's what I do. I notice. I don't jump to conclusions, but I collect data. And slowly, the data stopped pointing toward work emergencies. Still, I said nothing. Because confronting him without proof felt pointless. Because I already knew how that conversation would go. He would deny. He would explain. He would make me feel irrational for even asking. And I wasn't ready to doubt my marriage out loud. So I stayed quiet, and I watched. Once you start paying attention, it's impossible to stop. That was the problem. The more I tried to ignore the discomfort, the sharper it became. Patterns don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves quietly, through repetition, through details that feel insignificant until they stack up and refuse to be dismissed. The meetings increased. Once a week became twice. Twice became 3 times some weeks. There was always a reason, always a crisis that couldn't wait until morning. He'd apologize before I even asked, which should have reassured me, but instead made me uneasy. Apologies that arrive preemptively often exist to prevent questions, not to acknowledge wrongdoing. I noticed the way he checked his phone now, not casually, but protectively. Screen angled away from me. Notifications silenced. Phone face down on the counter. If I entered the room while he was texting, he'd lock the screen too quickly, then look up and smile like nothing had happened. That smile started to feel rehearsed. Friends noticed changes too, even if they didn't say it directly. At dinners, he seemed distracted, disengaged. Conversations that used to include me turned inward, as if I were an afterthought. When I spoke, he'd nod but not really listen. Later, he'd ask questions I'd already answered, proving he hadn't been present at all. His family didn't help. His mother commented once that he seemed so busy lately, then looked at me as if waiting for reassurance. I gave it to her. I always did. His sister joked that I was lucky to have a husband in demand. I smiled. I didn't correct her. I was already carrying enough doubt without sharing it. 3 months before everything ended, I started documenting. Not because I wanted to catch him, but because my instincts were screaming and I needed something solid to hold on to. Times, dates, excuses, changes in behavior. I created a spreadsheet and told myself it was temporary, just until I felt sane again. The numbers were brutal. 7 late-night meetings in 1 month. 7. And none of them followed the same pattern as genuine work emergencies. No emails, no calendar invites, no follow-up stress the next morning. Just absence, then distance. I still didn't confront him. Not yet, because deep down I knew the truth was already there. I just hadn't decided what I was going to do with it. Then, 2 weeks before the night I left, he got sloppy. He left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while he showered. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, knowing that whatever I saw would change everything. I looked, and there it was. Months of messages with someone from his office, complaints about me, about how predictable I was, how boring. How these meetings made him feel alive again. Plans. Intimacy disguised as conversation. I took screenshots, sent them to myself, put the phone back exactly where it had been. Then I sat on the edge of our bed for 2 hours, staring at the wall, realizing that the conflict wasn't coming. It had already been living in my house. I didn't confront him right away. Not after reading the messages. Not after seeing his words laid bare on a glowing screen, stripped of excuses and context. I knew myself well enough to understand that if I spoke in that moment, I would either explode or collapse, and neither would get me what I needed. So I waited. I waited through 2 more late-night meetings, through 2 more carefully delivered lies, through the way he kissed my forehead absent-mindedly before disappearing into his office with his laptop. I waited because I wasn't deciding whether he was unfaithful. That part was already clear. I was deciding how I wanted to end it. The night everything broke open was a Tuesday. Ordinary, quiet, the kind of night that hides life-altering moments behind routine. I had cooked dinner, something simple, because he'd been too slammed lately to help with anything around the house. We sat across from each other at the table, the clink of cutlery filling the spaces where conversation used to live. His phone buzzed. I saw it instantly, the way his expression changed. That flicker of anticipation he didn't bother to hide anymore. He glanced at the screen, then at me, already halfway into his explanation. "I have to take a meeting tonight," he said. Last-minute thing with the executive team. Probably going to run until 11 or so. Another one. I kept my voice neutral. That's the third this week. I know, he replied quickly. I'm sorry. It's just a crazy time at work. You understand, right? I didn't answer immediately. I watched him instead. The way he avoided my eyes. The way his body leaned forward, already preparing to leave. I could see it clearly now. I wasn't a partner in that moment. I was an obstacle. Stop acting insecure, he added when I stayed silent. It's just a quick late-night meeting. That was it. That sentence. The casual dismissal of my intuition, my intelligence, my place in my own marriage. I looked at him and said calmly, Sure, you've always been loyal to your meetings. He froze for half a second, fork suspended in midair. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said lightly, just acknowledging your dedication to work. He searched my face for anger, suspicion, accusation. Found none. I had learned how to hide it. That skill came from months of being told my questions were insecurity, my observations paranoia. Okay, he said slowly. I'll be back late. Don't wait up. I won't. He left around 8:30, dressed too well for a video call, wearing the cologne I'd given him for our anniversary. I stood at the window and watched his car pull out of the driveway, feeling strangely calm. Then I went to the bedroom. I opened my nightstand drawer. My wedding ring rested there beside my watch and a few other personal things. I had worn it every day for 6 years. Through arguments, through reconciliations, through every moment I believed we were building something together. I slipped it off my finger and held it in my palm. It felt heavier than it ever had before, weighted with meaning it no longer deserved. I walked to his home office and placed the ring in the center of his desk chair. Just the ring. No note, no explanation. A full stop at the end of a sentence he had already written. Then I started packing. I packed with a calm that scared me, not because I felt nothing, but because I felt everything all at once, and my mind chose order as a form of survival. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I moved through the house like someone finishing a task they'd rehearsed quietly for weeks. Clothes first, work things, important documents, my laptop. The few personal items that actually felt like mine, not ours. I avoided sentimental objects on purpose. Photographs could wait. Memory has a way of surfacing whether you invite it or not. By midnight, the bedroom looked unfamiliar. Empty spaces where my clothes had been. A closet that suddenly belonged to him alone. I paused once, sitting on the edge of the bed, and felt my chest tighten, not from doubt, but from the weight of finality. 6 years doesn't dissolve easily. It leaves residue. It presses against your ribs and asks if you're sure. I was sure. I worked until 3 in the morning, loading the car in the quiet dark, careful not to wake the neighbors. The house still held furniture, books, the accumulated debris of a shared life, but those were just things. What mattered was already gone. When I closed the front door, I didn't look back. I drove across town to a hotel and checked in for an extended stay, my voice steady as I gave my name. Sleep came in fragments. When I woke at 7, my phone was vibrating. 23 missed calls, 47 messages, all from him. I didn't read them yet. I made coffee first. Let the warmth ground me. Let my breathing slow. I wanted clarity before contact. At 8, I finally looked. The messages told the story in stages. Confusion first. Where are you? Why is your ring on my chair? Panic next. Call me. This isn't funny. Then anger. You can't just leave. This is childish. And finally, desperation. Please come home. We can fix this. I love you. I felt a familiar pull, the instinct to explain, to soften, to manage his emotions. I recognized it for what it was and set it down. I sent one message, only one. I know about David. I know about all of it. I've known for months. We're done. My lawyer will contact you this week. The calls came immediately. I declined them all. The text shifted to denial, then bargaining, then blame. You're paranoid. We're just colleagues. How dare you spy on me? The pattern was textbook. I didn't respond. Instead, I called a lawyer I'd already researched and scheduled a consultation for that afternoon. I wasn't acting on impulse. I was executing a plan. By the time I walked into the lawyer's office that afternoon, the shock had settled into something colder and more focused. Preparation. I had spent weeks quietly organizing documents, screenshots, timelines, financial statements, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew how this would unfold once he realized charm and denial wouldn't pull me back. Karen was direct, the kind of woman who didn't waste time with sympathy she couldn't afford. She listened, reviewed the messages, skimmed the spreadsheet I'd kept, and nodded slowly. "You've documented a clear pattern of deception," she said. "At minimum, this is an emotional affair. Legally, you're protected. No kids, joint assets. This can be clean if you stay firm." Clean didn't mean easy. That night he found me. I came back to the hotel after dinner and saw him immediately in the lobby, sitting stiffly on one of the low chairs, like he'd been holding himself together by force. He looked smaller without the house, without the role he'd been playing so confidently. No makeup, hair pulled back, eyes red. For a brief moment, the version of me that loved him stirred. Then I remembered every lie. "Please," he said as soon as he stood, "can we just talk?" "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is," he insisted, lowering his voice as if secrecy could save him. "You're throwing away our marriage over a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "I read the messages, months of them." His face drained of color. "You went through my phone." "You went through our marriage," I replied. "I'd say we're even." He tried everything after that. Minimization. "We're just friends." Reframing. I was venting, gaslighting. "You're twisting things." When that didn't work, he cried, promised counseling, swore it was never physical, claimed confusion. "Emotional affairs are still affairs," I said. "You gave him the intimacy that belonged in this marriage." When I showed him the screenshot, the hotel room number, the time, his defenses collapsed. Silence filled the space between us, heavy and undeniable. He whispered apologies that arrived far too late, each one unraveling as soon as it was spoken. "I'm done," I said. "The papers will be served next week. Don't contact me again unless it's through lawyers." I walked past him to the elevator and didn't turn around when he called my name. When the doors closed, I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness. Just an absence where obligation used to live. The escalation continued after that. Messages from mutual friends urging reconciliation. His family asking me to reconsider, framing his betrayal as a phase, a mistake, something I should absorb for the sake of stability. I refused. Every time I said no, I felt myself growing steadier. Because escalation only works when someone keeps backing down, and I was done retreating. The quiet after that confrontation was heavier than anything that came before it. Not the silence of relief, not yet. The silence of aftermath, the kind that settles into your bones when the adrenaline fades and there's nothing left to distract you from the cost of what you've done, even when you know it was necessary. I lay awake in the hotel room that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, not just the betrayal, but my own endurance. 6 years of small compromises. 6 years of trusting explanations that didn't align with reality. 6 years of telling myself that love meant patience, that questioning too much was insecurity, that noticing patterns was a flaw instead of a skill. Doubt crept in quietly. Not doubt about his actions, doubt about me. Had I waited too long? Had I allowed it to go this far by staying silent? Had I mistaken composure for strength and avoidance for grace? The questions didn't accuse him. They accused me. I thought about the house we'd bought, the routines we'd built, the version of the future I'd assumed would arrive if I just kept holding everything together. I mourned that future, not because it was healthy, but because it was familiar. Letting go of something familiar hurts even when it's hurting you. Messages from his family echoed in my head. His mother's voice, disappointed but measured, suggesting counseling, forgiveness, perspective. His sister's text framing his affair as confusion, as pressure, as something I should help him work through. No one asked how long I'd been carrying the weight of his dishonesty. No one asked what it cost me to keep pretending. That was the lowest point, not the discovery, not the ring on the chair, not the lawyer's office. This moment, alone, when the narrative shifted from "I've been wronged" to "I allowed myself to be diminished." That realization hurt more deeply than betrayal ever could. I cried then, quietly, not for him, but for the version of myself that believed silence was strength, that believed being reasonable would protect me, that believed loyalty meant enduring discomfort indefinitely. But even in that darkness, something else surfaced, a steady, grounding truth. I hadn't left because I was angry. I left because I was awake. I hadn't abandoned the marriage. The marriage had already been abandoned, slowly, deliberately, long before I packed a single box. The dark moment didn't break me. It stripped me down to something honest. And once everything unnecessary fell away, there was space for something else to grow. The turning point didn't arrive with a phone call or a revelation. It arrived the morning I woke up and realized I wasn't afraid of the day anymore. For months, fear had been my constant companion. Fear of confrontation, fear of being wrong, fear of losing what I'd built. Even after I left, that fear lingered in the background, whispering that I'd gone too far, that I'd overreacted, that I'd destroyed something that could have been saved if I'd just tried harder. That morning, it was gone. I noticed it in the smallest ways, the way I breathed more deeply as I made coffee, the way my shoulders weren't hunched toward my ears, the way my phone lay silent on the table, no longer a source of dread. I realized I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next excuse, the next lie, the next moment where I'd have to decide whether to believe my own eyes or his words. Later that day, a mutual friend reached out, someone who had stayed out of everything until then. She didn't accuse or advise, she just told me the truth. She'd known about David, not the full extent, but enough. Enough to recognize the pattern when it started. Enough to know that my husband hadn't been confused or overwhelmed. He'd been deliberate, careful, strategic. He'd planned his absences, crafted his explanations, and relied on my trust to give him cover. He assumed you'd never leave, she said gently. Everyone did. That sentence settled into me with unexpected calm. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply accurate. He hadn't underestimated my intelligence. He'd underestimated my willingness to choose myself. When he tried one last time to reach out that evening, the message was different from the others. No denial, no bargaining, just regret. He said he'd finally understood what he'd lost. He said the silence in the house was unbearable. He said he wished he'd listened sooner. I read it once and felt nothing pull at me. No satisfaction, no anger, just clarity. I didn't respond. That was the moment I knew I was done. Not because I'd won, not because he'd lost, but because my sense of self was no longer tied to his understanding or remorse. I didn't need him to admit the truth for it to be real. I didn't need closure from the person who'd caused the wound. The power shifted quietly, from managing his emotions to protecting my own, from explaining myself to honoring my instincts, from waiting for permission to walking forward without it. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was internal. And once it happened, there was no going back. The fallout didn't explode. It unraveled. At first, it was subtle. Mutual friends stopped reaching out the way they used to. Group chats went quiet. Invitations disappeared without explanation. I knew what was happening without needing to ask. People were choosing sides, or more accurately, choosing comfort. Staying neutral was easier than confronting the truth of what my husband had done. Then the story he told began to crack. It started with David, the man whose name had lived silently between us for months. According to a mutual acquaintance, David stopped responding to my husband's messages within days of me leaving. Once secrecy was gone and consequences arrived, whatever illusion they'd been playing at lost its appeal. There were no more late-night meetings, no more emotional refuge, just distance. That hit my husband harder than I expected. Not because he loved David, but because he had built an entire escape around the idea that someone else saw him differently. When that fantasy collapsed, there was nothing left to hide behind. His family turned next, slowly, reluctantly. At first, they framed it as stress, then miscommunication, then mutual fault. But the evidence didn't allow for much imagination. Screenshots don't bend. Timelines don't soften. Eventually, concern replaced defense. Not concern for me, but concern for him and the mess he'd created. I heard he moved out of the house temporarily, that the silence he'd complained about became permanent, that his explanations no longer landed the way they used to. When people stop believing you, even the truth starts to sound like manipulation. The legal process stretched on for months. He tried to delay it at first, suggesting reconciliation, mediation, anything that would put me back in reach. But once formal filings began, once everything was laid out plainly and professionally, he backed down. His lawyer likely advised him that dragging it out would only expose more. We settled out of court, split assets, divided savings, a clean break on paper that felt surreal after 6 years of shared life. I walked away with my share and something else that mattered far more, my clarity. He moved to another city not long after the divorce finalized. A new job, a fresh narrative. People like him always find a way to reframe the story so they don't have to sit with the truth for too long. I didn't correct anyone who repeated his version. The people who mattered already knew me. Everyone else was noise. The fallout landed where it belonged, not through revenge, not through exposure, through reality, finally unfiltered. And I walked away without needing to watch it burn. The months after the divorce didn't feel like recovery at first. They felt like recalibration. My life didn't suddenly become joyful or easy. It became quiet. And in that quiet, I finally heard myself again. I moved into a smaller place downtown. Fewer rooms, fewer memories echoing off the walls. The first night there, I slept on a mattress on the floor with a single lamp plugged in, and I slept better than I had in years. Not because I was happy, but because I wasn't bracing anymore. There was no tension waiting to ambush me in the evening. No explanations to swallow. No intuition to silence. Work became a refuge in the healthiest way. I focused. I showed up fully. I was promoted within the year, not because I worked harder than before, but because my energy was finally my own. I started running in the mornings, cooking meals that weren't rushed, reading books I'd abandoned halfway through because emotional exhaustion makes concentration impossible. People asked if I regretted leaving without a conversation, without closure. I didn't. Closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you take when you stop waiting for permission to trust yourself. I kept my wedding ring in a box for a long time, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder, not of him, of the moment I chose myself, of the night I said everything without saying a word. That ring on his chair wasn't cruelty, it was honesty. It was the clearest boundary I'd ever drawn. I eventually started dating again, slowly, carefully. I told the truth about my past without turning it into a warning label. The man I'm seeing now doesn't demand trust. He earns it. He doesn't dismiss questions as insecurity. He answers them. He doesn't disappear into the night with excuses that smell like cologne and broken promises. Here's the lesson I wish someone had told me earlier. Love does not require you to doubt your own perception. Loyalty is not proven by endurance. And silence, when it's forced on you, is not peace. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is stop explaining. Stop negotiating. Stop hoping someone will become who they've already shown you they are not. That night, I didn't end my marriage with anger or revenge. I ended it with clarity. And that clarity gave me back a life that finally feels like mine again.